Well, it may be somewhat inaccurate to say that horror depends on certain developments, crisis developments in culture. It's probably true to say that there are more horror films at particular times in history, but really, if you look at the history of cinema, you see that horror films were made right from the beginning with Georges Méliès and his, little 1-minute films. So horror, and of course it existed in literature and folk tales and woodcuts and so on before film. So horror is, I think, consistent historically. There's always been an interest in horror and always an audience for horror. But what does change is what specifically is regarded as horrifying at any particular historical moment. Yeah, well, Night of the Living Dead specifically, since you ask about it, clearly is tied into certain events going on in the U.S. in the late 1960s, like the war in Vietnam, for example, the divide between pro-war and anti-war factions. So, in fact, the zombies have been referred to as the Nixon silent majority, by some critics, and of course, issues of racial tensions. I mean, that's crucial, and simultaneously, contemporaneously, with the release of that film, there were all kinds of racial. I don't want to call them riots, but demonstrations. Violent ones that were happening in major cities throughout the U.S. And the end of that film, when the images become still images, you can't help but see those images as evoking the past horrors of lynchings in the American South. But just to speak more generally, if you look at horror films in the 1950s, for example, most of them, or many of them, explain where their monster has come from as a result of nuclear testing or radiation of some sort. So, in the 1950s, the Cold War was happening. It is the dawn of the nuclear age, and horror films reflect that clearly.